All right, thanks everybody for attending our Repro Roadshow webinar today. Just a few pieces of housekeeping before I turn it over to Nico Wilkinson from Planned Parenthood of the Rocky Mountains. If you have questions, go ahead and type them into the Q&A box. We will be taking questions at the end of the webinar. Also, all of the attendees are muted, so don't worry about if something's going on at home, we can't hear it. We're just very excited that you could all be with us today. So I'm going to turn it over to Nico.
Thanks, Delana. Hi, everyone. Let me make sure I am unmuted. Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Nico Wilkinson. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I'm with Planned Parenthood of the Rocky Mountains. And I just want to say thank you so much for being here today. And then I will turn it over to Aisha to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, my name is Aisha. I'm here with the ACLU of Colorado. I use she, her pronouns, and again, thank you so much for joining us today.
And thank you to Delana for being our awesome moderator. And a major shout out to the Reproductive Health Rights and Justice Coalition, who we work alongside.
So today we're hoping you all leave with one, a deeper understanding on abortion later in pregnancy, some details about the abortion ban that's going to be on the November 2020 ballot, some tools to bring home to you and your community to continue advocating, and some ways to stay engaged. Finally, we'll be having a question and answer portion at the end of this webinar. So if you have any questions that arise throughout this webinar, feel free to ask those, and Delana will moderate that Q&A portion at the end of the webinar.
We're going to kick this off by sharing a couple of recent court cases, as well as some cases coming down the line to sort of give you an idea of what the current federal landscape looks like. Recently, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in the case of June Medical Services, LLC versus Russo. This was the first abortion case to reach the Supreme Court since the confirmation of conservative judges Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch, whose appointments changed the makeup of the court to one skewed towards anti-reproductive rights and anti-abortion. While we did receive a 5-4 victory, reaffirming abortion rights in the Louisiana case, we still have to be vigilant. Our fight is far from over. This would have required abortion providers in Louisiana to have hospital admission requirements, which is just another way to restrict access and put more unnecessary barriers in place for abortion providers. And then in Trump versus Pennsylvania, the Supreme Court issued their ruling recently, which upholds 2 Trump administration rules that allow employers and universities to deny their employees and students coverage for contraceptive care based on a religious or moral objection. But there are still more threats beyond the Supreme Court because politicians at the state and federal level are continuing to do everything they can to take control of our bodies, our lives, and our futures. In fact, abortion is on the ballot in 2020, not just in Colorado, but also in Louisiana. Politicians are still exploiting a pandemic to try and restrict access to reproductive care, and there are 16 other abortion cases one step away from the Supreme Court. While we may have received a victory with June Medical, we are not anticipating getting a victory for every case. And that is why it is still imperative to protect access in the states because we can't rely on the Supreme Court.
I'd also like to recommend checking out the SCOTUS blog, which is not directly affiliated with the Supreme Court of the United States, but it does offer you different comprehensive coverage and interpretations of Supreme Court rulings, and you can find this as an app or on Twitter. So what exactly is abortion later in pregnancy? First and foremost, abortion later in pregnancy or later abortion is a political concept created by anti-abortion politicians and activists who are seeking to ban all abortion. Second, later abortion typically describes abortion during the 2nd or 3rd trimesters. However, only about 1% of abortions in the United States are performed at or after those 21 weeks of gestation. Third, later abortion bans impose a one-size-fits-all restriction that does not account for the unique circumstances of every single pregnancy. Quite frankly, they're arbitrary, medically unnecessary, and unconstitutional under Roe v. Wade. Another thing to note on these arbitrary bans is that they often make it difficult for someone seeking an abortion to access care and navigate the financial and logistical barriers of abortion in a timely manner. Currently, Colorado does not restrict later abortions. we're what's considered a safe haven for later abortion care, meaning people from different states where they're unable to seek out an abortion later in their pregnancy will often come to Colorado to safely seek an abortion. Some other things to note is that often reporters and the media will use the term late-term abortion, and we should try to educate them that this is a made-up anti-abortion term, and that medically, pregnancies and abortions are often discussed in trimesters, not terms. Another good option would be to refer to these as abortion later in pregnancy. So Proposition 115 is what is on the ballot in November 2020. First of all, Proposition 115 bans abortion after these 22 weeks, subsequently taking away an individual's decision-making that should happen between the pregnant individual and their doctor. Additionally, these efforts for Proposition 115 are led by Due Date Too Late, which is a group of anti-abortion activists and politicians. Leaders of Due Date Too Late are also the same people who will show up to testify in support of personhood abortion bills at the legislature year after year. They're the same people who've championed anti-LGBTQ+ bills this year, most notably the anti-trans youth bills that criminalize doctors who treat trans youth for gender dysphoria. They have consistently sought to criminalize doctors and take away individual freedom of individual decision-making in Colorado. Also, later abortion bans are championed by anti-abortion politicians, failed in the legislature in both 2018 and 2020. We believe that Proposition 115 is simply a response to past failed personhood abortion bans and can be seen as a necessary step towards banning all abortion in the state of Colorado. So how, again, does Proposition 115 affect reproductive freedom? One, it bans abortion after these 22 weeks of gestation, which is, again, an arbitrary number. Pregnancies are not referred to in their terms. They're counted through trimesters. Additionally, the Proposition 115 has no exception for health, rape or incest, or if a fetus will not survive, which is also referred to as fetal viability, meaning the fetus will not survive outside of the womb unless it has medical attention. Additionally, doctors can face criminal charges and medical license suspension if they are to offer an abortion after this 22-week period.
It's also important to note that Proposition 115 is not based in medical facts. It hurts real people, and it takes away the freedom of personal decision-making about medical care, and it destroys a safe haven. 2/3 of later abortion patients in Colorado travel from out of state.
Again, Proposition 115 is a quite frank attack on Roe v. Wade. One, it's unconstitutional under Roe v. Wade. As we've discussed, Roe v. Wade and subsequent court decisions state that before fetal viability, a state cannot ban an abortion under any circumstance. The decision lies between the pregnant individual and their doctor. Additionally, after the point of fetal viability, any abortion must have an exception for the pregnant person's life and health, and it must be up to their medical provider to determine whether their health and life is in jeopardy. Proposition 115 also does not have any health exemption at all. If a pregnant person is experiencing any physical or mental health barriers because of their pregnancy, Proposition 115 states that they still cannot have an abortion, and it also limits the exception for life when the individual is in immediate danger due to physical illness or injury. And lastly, there is no exception, again, for rape, incest, or fetal viability if a fetus will survive outside of the womb without medical attention. And since every pregnancy is unique, fetal viability must be determined by a case-by-case basis. So now I'm going to pass it over to Nico again to talk about how to talk about abortion later in pregnancy.
So I think that where we'll start is we will talk about Erica Christensen and her story. So she was 35 when she and her husband, then 38, decided to start a family. And after suffering a miscarriage, they were happy to get pregnant again soon after, but discovered at 30 weeks that their pregnancy was diagnosed with a rare condition that would have prevented the fetus from surviving outside of the womb. And she shares her story in her own words about traveling from her home state of New York all the way to Colorado and back to terminate the wanted pregnancy in order to safeguard her health and prevent unnecessary suffering. She's vocal about her support and personal experiences with abortion later in pregnancy. And in February of this year, she testified against the federal 22-week ban. And then she and her husband founded Patient Forward, which was founded with this goal, in their words, of after seeing the power of patient narratives firsthand, we began organizing later abortion patients across the country. Now, when we discuss some of the reasons that one may have an abortion later in pregnancy, it tends to fall within two realms, new information and barriers. So some new information that changes the course of the pregnancy may arise, such as the pregnancy was discovered after the first trimester, there was a poor fetal diagnosis, there was a newly discovered threat to the health or life of the patient, and or there was a sudden life event or significant change in circumstances. There are also barriers that lead to abortion later in pregnancy, such as abortion restrictions and burdensome regulations, difficulty paying for an abortion earlier, interactions with crisis pregnancy centers, childcare struggles, conflicts with family and or one's partner about the pregnancy, or difficulty finding or traveling to an abortion provider. And there are plenty of people who also fit in both categories. They may get their information later in their pregnancy and then have difficulty accessing abortion care. So Colorado is a safe haven. No patient should have to travel across state lines to receive their health care, but unfortunately that is what we're seeing. And Colorado is one of the places that patients are able to come for abortion care. This ban would not only have disparate effects for Colorado residents, but for patients all across the country. We have seen attempts to restrict abortion care across the country. In fact, according to the Guttmacher Institute, 57% of women of reproductive age are now living in a state that is either hostile or very hostile to abortion rights. But in Colorado, we are fortunate to serve as a safe haven region where patients can come from across the country to receive the care they aren't able to receive in their home state. For a little bit of context about the out-of-state patients that Planned Parenthood of the Rocky Mountains is seeing in Colorado, in February, we saw 16 patients from Texas, and in April, that number increased over 10-fold to 212. For this reason, it is even more important that we defeat Proposition 115 and protect access to abortion care in our state. So as you're working with us to combat this ban, it's important to know where stigma may be in your language and how to speak about abortion later in pregnancy in a way that is accurate and compassionate. So there are labels like late-term abortion, which is not a medical term, and that is why we say abortion later in pregnancy. And some things that you can do are share possible circumstances that an individual might seek care later in pregnancy, such as possible complications or trouble accessing abortion because of limitations. Also, lead with values and model showing compassion.
As we continue to destigmatize our language, some things we don't want to do is focus our examples on fetal diagnosis, rape, or incest. We cannot know what the situation is like for the individual who is seeking an abortion. Some other things we should try to avoid as we try to destigmatize our language surrounding this is to not use words like tragic and awful. We should be offering empathy and support to people seeking abortion later in pregnancy, not shaming them. And lastly, let's not repeat the opposition's framing. So now that we've learned a couple of different ways to talk about abortion later in pregnancy and learned some more information on Proposition 115, let's talk about some ways for you all to get involved. The first step was coming to this webinar today. Again, thank you on behalf of the ACLU of Colorado and Planned Parenthood of the Rocky Mountains for joining us today. Some other things you can do is if you have anything to say about abortion later in pregnancy, we're asking that you join the Colorado Reproductive Health, Rights, and Justice Speakers Bureau. If you have any stories or any further information that you've experienced seeking abortion later in pregnancy, feel free to follow this bit.ly link, and there's more information on how to work with us there. You can also text no bans to 33777 to continue working with the ACLU of Colorado and seek out more information.
You can also follow this bit.ly link here, bit.ly/getinvolvedpprm 2020. It is case sensitive, so I'd recommend screenshotting the screen if you'd like to find that later. And you can fill out that form and get on our list so that you can also hear about the work that we're doing in regards to this ban. You can also follow both PPRM and the ACLU on social media. And what's really important is that in your communities, for your family members, your friends, you are a trusted messenger. And so talking to them about Proposition 115 is so incredibly valuable. And you have the power to change minds and help us beat this just by talking to your friends and helping to educate them. So don't underestimate your power.
And here are also some more resources if you're even more interested in learning about abortion later in pregnancy and this 22-week ban in Colorado. These first 3 links from the Guttmacher Institute, Abortion Care Reality, and Patient Forward have some more detailed information on abortion later in pregnancy. We've also got some articles from the Denver Post and the Sentinel Colorado and Rewire News talking about specifically the abortion ban for 22 weeks in Colorado. The ACLU of Colorado also has some statements on the state of reproductive rights for those in prisons and jails in Colorado. You can also visit aclu-co.org/advocacy from home to learn about some different ways you can be an advocate from home. And lastly, there's some more information on reproductive health care services from the Women's Freedom Fund, Planned Parenthood of the Rocky Mountains, and RHRJ Colorado for Reproductive Health and Reproductive Justice Colorado. So this is now the portion where you're all more than welcome to ask any questions, and Delana will be sharing that with all of us. Don't be shy, and thank you again for those of you who've joined us today and listened to this webinar.
Thank you, that was great. So this is a question that we've gotten a few times. What's the difference between 115, Proposition 115, or Initiative 120? Are they the same thing or are they different? Does anybody want to take that one? So I'll take it. What happens when it's in the initiative stage is it gets assigned a number. Once it gets on the ballot, it gets assigned a new number, kind of in line with where we are, you know, on different propositions. And so it's the same thing. So don't worry, you don't have to fight 2 abortion bans this year, just the one. And it is now proposition, or yeah, what was it? I'm getting confused. It is Proposition 115. So think of it this way. When it's an initiative, they're trying to get it on the ballot. And when it's a proposition, it's already on the ballot. So I hope that helps. Are there any other questions? Here's one. Are there hashtags we should use? That I'm going to have to turn over to you too, because I'm not sure.
I'm not familiar with any particular hashtags yet. However, please, a great way to find out about our new media guidance and ways you can get involved on your own social media pages would be to text that number to the ACLU and or sign up on Planned Parenthood's Google form so that we can keep on updating you on communications guidance.
And this is Ariana Belkin. I'm with Planned Parenthood of the Rocky Mountains as well. One of the hashtags we are currently using and will continue throughout this fight is hashtag #NoBansColorado. So our entire coalition and all the great partners we work with will be using that same hashtag. I'd also encourage you to use hashtags that just support abortion care in general. Abortion is healthcare is a great one, but our coalition one is #NoBansColorado.
Okay. And Lizzie, who is from the ACLU of Colorado, also said there's one bans off Colorado too, is a hashtag we're using. So Fantastic.
And going back with the number that Nico mentioned earlier, all of this information, this slideshow, those websites we've mentioned, all of this different stuff will be sent out in an email later today. So if there's anything that you missed or you didn't have a chance to catch during the presentation, do not worry. We will be sending all of this out later, and a recording of this will be available on YouTube.
Yes, we'll get the recording up later today. And just as a plug for Durango, or if you have friends that actually missed this today, we do have a webinar for the Durango area on Thursday at noon. So if you just want to watch this again, it's a lot of dense information, so it's good to see it more than once. And Nicole says thank you, and we thank you, Nicole, for joining us today.
Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today.
Oh, we got one more question. Let's see. Any Colorado Springs specific info? Nico, do you have anything you want to share?
So currently, due to COVID, we are operating pretty much online, pretty digitally. So a lot of our events are going to be accessible across the state. But again, we will keep you posted if anything region specific comes up.
Great. All right, I'm just giving it another second in case anybody wants to type in a question. I know I'm a very slow typist, so I feel like I have to give people time. All right. Well, it looks like we might be done for today, but I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And I guess we will hopefully see people on Thursday. Tell your friends, and tell your friends to vote now. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks again.